Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Pujita Guha and I am currently enrolled as a PhD student in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. I am also a visiting faculty at the Delhi College of Arts and Commerce, where I teach undergraduate courses in mass communication. Today, I will speak about how cinema reflected, spoke about and resonated with Japan's military and nationalist propaganda before and after the war. This paper will introduce students as to how cinema becomes a part of a larger propaganda machine reflecting the political ecology of a turbulent period. This module is divided into three parts. First, the introduction and the emergence of various genres in the pre-war period. Second, a reflection of cinema in the post-war movement, specifically through two films. First, The Tower of Lilies, and second, 24 Eyes. Third, a small conclusion and critique of this moment. Thank you. While Japanese popular culture enthusiastically embraced modernism, as seen in the previous module, a critical backlash against it followed soon after. In Japan and elsewhere, along with modernization, arose popular nationalism, developed at the very moment when the traditional culture that it drew from became unstable due to modernization. In the Japanese instance, the imagined community of the modern Japan period was a derivation of the new Confucianist ideologies of Tokugawa regime. Within the Japanese films of the late 30s and early 40s, the invention of tradition clearly meant the continuing reinvention of a masculine and group-oriented society, as observed in the group ethos of the family state, the Kazoku Koka. In thematic terms, cultural nationalism found expression in the two dominant discourses of A, the depiction of the male hero, that is the Jidaigeki, the period drama, and B, the Gengaigeki, the contemporary drama. By the mid-1930s, each was clearly divided in terms of both the geography and the production houses that crafted them. Nikatsu held a dominant position in Kyoto, making Jidaigekis colloquially the kingdom of period drama, Jidaigeki Okuku, while the Shochiku Tokyo studios control the Gengaigeki, also known as the kingdom of actresses or Joyu Okuku. The rest of the chapter talks about this history in detail, noting the shift that happens from the pre-war to the post-war filmmaking practices in Japan. From the outbreak of the Sino-Japanese War in 1937 until 1945, the Japanese film industry was under the Ministry of Home Affairs and the media section of the Imperial Army. Both the Home Ministry and the Army heavily subsidized the film industry, holding the industry within an ironclad framework, in tandem with the tough censorship laws that emerged at this point. They could force any errant studio out of business, fire cast and crew immediately, and their censorship included reviewing scripts and ideas extensively before shooting. Fumio Kame, one of the top directors at Toho, whose film Fighting Soldiers 1940 depicted tired soldiers at the war front, was fired and left with no work until the end of war. Censorship regulations during that period included an emphasis on popular films with positive themes, a restriction on comedy and satire, a curb on the bourgeois melodrama that extolled private business, rejection of scenes of women smoking and drinking, and even dialogues with foreign words. Films depicting the productive sectors of national life, especially agriculture and later war, were greatly encouraged. The national policy of films, Kokushaku Eiga, that emerged at this point drew exhaustively from the existing script guidelines of the 1939 film law. The war films not only had to express Japan's rising imperialistic ambitions as it battles one at foreign locales, but to also humanize war itself. These films concentrated on the humane side of the Japanese soldiers and the brotherly bonds between them. These films also served the war effort by taking up the issue of how to dive bravely in battle and treating war as a kind of spiritual training, a unique neo-Confucianist Japanese model of propaganda. Apart from the battle scenes, training scenes became an important part of many Japanese war films, detailing every aspect of this spiritual process. This exercise was much part and parcel of Mud and Soldiers 1939, whose director Tomotaka Tasaka actually went to observe the fighting at the China front. There, he discovered that war is mostly walking and consequently included this into the film. Tasaka argued that with the earnest repetition of this one single simple activity, the ego was subjugated and the spirit awakened to the love of one's fellow soldiers. This aesthetic was not only seen in Mud and Soldiers but also in Kaigun Navy 1943, in Keisuke Kinoshita's Rikugun Army 1944, as well as in most Japanese war films made during and after the Second World War. Before the war, the Jidaigeki genre. Keeping the film law's censorship rules in mind, the Jidaigeki genre that emerged at this point largely served to exalt the purportedly golden history of the nation and restore glory, not just to the dying breed of samurais but to the spirit of war and military might per se. Largely seen as a masculine genre, the Jidaimono was clearly linked to the star personas of principal actors of that time, the three treasures of Nikatsu, Bando Tusamaburo, Arashi Kanjuro, and Katao Shizu. Also, by the late 30s, the Ronin, masterless samurai, from being considered insignificant by the modern state in the late 20s, was recodified into positive terms. His death seen as the ultimate expression of loyalty through sacrifice. Though rarely depicted in pre-war films, seppuku scenes, that is acts of ritualistic self-mutilation, gained immediate cultural popularity in the 40s. In Kenji Mizoguchi's Genroku Chushingura, the 47 Ronin of the Genroku era, 1941-42, the inclusion of the seppuku scene shifted the focus of the drama away from the triumphant attack to the Ronin sacrifice, laying an even greater emphasis on their willing submission to law. In earlier adaptations of the same, the Chushingura films concluded with the Ronin's victorious march through the streets, carrying the severed head of Kira Kosunekusuke, the enemy of their dead lord. With the introduction of sound in movies, the portrait of a Jidaigeki hero changed considerably. In the silent era of the late 1920s, the expression of inner conflict that was so pivotal to the characters was in part dependent on the Benshi narration, the verbal expression of his inner thoughts. By the 1930s, in the absence of Benshi narration, emphasis shifted to action being the outward expression of inner feelings. Therefore, speed linked to human movement gained considerable import, the scenes sharing the audiences a sense of thrill and bodily intensity. Sawada Shojiro and his Shinkoku-geki theatre movement were credited with the introduction of the realistic display of sword fight, Kenkeki scenes into Japanese theatre. Even as the stylized presentation of sword fight scenes effectively called for a momentary halt in the drama, the Mi pose, Sawada altered the tempo and fluidity of his drama as his actors rushed headlong into the melee. The depiction of speed and human movement was not only dependent on the actor but was also enhanced through editing and camera movement. In the Tachimawari sequences, action was maintained to great effect, primarily through rhythmic editing. That is, editing the film based on the duration of action or a predetermined length, or graphic matches employed in tracking shots of the chase scenes. In this shot-by-shot breakdown of an early Bando Samamaburo film, Orochi 1925, noted film scholar David Bordwell notes how the rules of the Chambara film perfected by Kurosawa were already set into motion by the 20s. In the sequence illustrated here, figure 3.1 and panel 1 of that, a young man played by Bando himself finds his way through the town, even if he is surrounded by his opponents on all sides. The first two images open the sequence when the film cuts from a long shot of the scene to a closer shot of the star. Panel 2. As Bando looks left outside of the frame, director Futagagawa Buntaro cuts to an assailant looking at right back at him, graphically matching between different faces to give the audience a sense of scale. In panel 3, the director then cuts to multiple hands stretching their hands at Bando. In the last panel 4, multiple shots of fighters looking leftward at Bando are depicted, indicating that the star has been cornered from all sides. Moreover, the sequence depends on rhythmic editing, cutting shots depending on the very nature of the action itself. Before the war, propaganda and the empire. The Japanese were quick to realize the potential of film propaganda as one of the many weapons of war and as a tool in the management of empire, going far back as the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 5. The Yoshizawa Shoten Film Company, which in the previous year had opened Japan's first permanent cinema, sent a camera team to follow the Japanese forces, a practice that soon became regular. Due to the Japanese colonial policy, all film studios established in the colonies were also quasi-national, such as the one in Taiwan and Korea. In Taiwan, Japan's first colony from 1895, a film department called the Taiwan Eiga Kyokai, Taiwan Motion Picture Association, was attached to the existing Kyokukai, Taiwan Education Society, to promote Japanese culture. In the later 40s, the Taiwan Motion Picture Association expanded operations to produce newsreels and cultural films from the overseas colonies to be regularly screened alongside popular cinema in the domestic market. If popular cinema till the Second World War defined Japanese nationalism in terms of an ideal masculinity, the essence of the empire in mainland China and Taiwan was defined in terms of its opposite, femininity. This occurred through MANE's or Manchu Eiga Kyokai, Manchurian Motion Picture Association, shortened to MANE, that is, their principal actress Yamaguchi Yoshiko, alias Ri Koran or Li Jianglan. Through her seductive Chinese image, captivating singing voice, her fluency in foreign languages, Chinese, various dialects of it, French and Japanese, and the media's constant reportage of her movements between China, Manchuria, Taiwan, Korea and Japan, identified in her a tangible sense the multifaceted cultural aspects of the Japanese empire. She could seamlessly stitch the wide geographies of this empire within her and yet remain the ideal romantic beauty. The Japanese male leads who starred alongside Ri Koran, Hasegawa Kazuo and Sano Shuji similarly exemplified the positive features of colonial expansion as they brought science and technology to the backward societies of China and elsewhere. Moreover, romance in the empire stands as a metaphor for the harmonious relations between the Japanese and the Chinese and policy of an Asian co-prosperity sphere. The post-war conversion. A substantial number of filmmakers who had complied with Japan's war efforts cooperated in turn with the occupation forces in 1945 when instructed that films be made henceforth with democracy as their theme. This conversion, as films critic Tadao Sato notes, was performed by directors who ideologically vaulted at this time. Tadashi Imai in 1942 directed The Suicide Troops of the Watchtower, an emotional portrayal of Japanese security troops, and in 1946 made An Enemy of the People, a quasi-fictionalized impeachment of Japan's wartime leaders. In 1942, Satsuo Yamamoto's A Triumph of Wing sang praises of the fearless Falcon fighter pilots, while in 1947 he co-directed with Fumio Kame the anti-war tract War and Peace. Keisuke Kinoshita made Army in 1944, a melodramatic film about a mother whose family sacrifices for the war, and in 1946 helmed A Morning with the Osone Family, a survival drama of a liberal family in wartime Japan. Apart from the films themselves, interviews and public commentary of that time focused on how post-war filmmaking was an exercise either in trying to make up for the complicity of these filmmakers in the propaganda machine or in expressing their newfound freedom of speech. In all these films, and especially for Kinoshita, the microcosmic world of the family is washed away by the waves of war, commoners being subject to historical forces much beyond their control. Aesthetically, this translates into a melodramatic genre where great actions of historical sacrifice are rendered into powerful emotions, wringing the last tears from its audiences. Caught between larger administrative decisions, pity and vulnerability, the very human condition becomes a hopeless situation, often extending beyond the limited domains of war. In A Japanese Tragedy 1953, a mother commits suicide when left to die by her cold-hearted post-war children. And in The Garden of Women 1954, two young girls are separated, one going astray and the other committing suicide because of the oppressive education system. Here, the films are underlined with a common premise of suffering, of promise having turned to failure, but also of little joy strung together by social bonding in times of crisis. Imai's The Suicide Troops of Watchtower and The Tower of Lilies 1953 are examples of this. In both, Imai glorifies a group of sympathetic and yet tragic Japanese people, the security people and their families in Korea in the first one, and the schools in Okinawa in the second, who were under attack by Korean partisans or by American forces with the fear of a complete wipeout. The only difference was that in the former, the Japanese army came to their rescue, turning defeat into victory, and in the latter, the schoolgirls perished. This, as Sato notes, is only a change in the circumstance, not in the theme itself. Imai wrote the changing circumstances purely with visual imagery. In The Tower of Lilies, one notes a gradual disintegration of Okinawa and its innocent residents as they face the brutality of war. Without any particular narrative to anchor the plot, the film depicts a group of young girls and their daily lives as they begin to act as nurses in the nearby underground trenches. The film barely relies on dialogues, seeking to unveil the horrors of war with only the landscape, the action and decaying bodies in display. Early in the film, the fields in daytime are idyllic spaces where the young girls gather, sing and collect water, figure 3.3. Soon after, the fields that were once dear and familiar become uninhabitable and desolate, hostile spaces where both civil and military lose lives with severe rapidity, figure 3.4. The bright sunny days give way to stormy nights, shiny grass blades change to slippery mud slopes, and the audience is shown in numerous loud airstrikes and bombings from close quarters. Nothing remains the morning after except drifting smog, innumerable dead bodies strewn around, and charred trees. Often framed in the absence of any human character, the landscape becomes a figure in its own right, projecting its own felt sense of trauma onto the audiences. Moreover, Imai alternates between the bruised landscape and the starving, decaying bodies in the bunker. In both the fields and the bunker, bodies pile up, and in the former absolutely dead, and in the latter inching towards it. Here, individual bodies become indistinguishable as Imai seeks to project the sheer numbers of scale of destruction that is war. Figure 3.5. The Tower of Lilies was a commercial success, probably because it showed both the scale of violence and the cooperation it necessitated, but eclipsing all possible records in the category was Kinoshita's 24 Eyes 1954. Based on the eponymous novel written by Sakei Suboi in 1952 during the height of the anti-war rhetoric, it takes an urgent concrete form of opposition to rearmament, a tactic sentimentalized in the film. Against Suboi's hard-hitting denunciation of the military, Kinoshita merely contents himself with a sweet, simple swan song about how the good and the earnest suffered on account of the war. The film begins in 1928 when a young woman named Hisako Gishi or Miss Oeshi, played by Hideko Takamine, arrives to teach at a primary school in a poor village on Shodoshima, a remote island in the inland sea. As a young carefree woman who wears a suit and rides a bicycle, she draws the ire and suspicion of the elders of the remote village. Despite initial distrust, she wins over the children and their parents' love and affection, caring for a generation to come that would soon be ravaged by war. The film imagines the early 30s as idyllic and Shodoshima as a blissful pastoral space that is slowly coming in contact with modernity. Here the fields are wide and endless, the community subsists on small-scale farming, traditional wood houses dot the vast landscape, and modern roads and forms of communication are a rarity. The virginal innocence of the landscape is heightened by Miss Oeshi's 12 adorable pupils and the 24 eyes of the title. Figure 3.6. Here we see the commemorative class photo being taken at the end of the first year. Throughout the film, this photograph comes in to represent an ideal, pure joyous time of their childhood, a time before all the troubles settled in. Note the vast, untouched landscape against which the photograph is taken, the space connoting a nostalgia for the pre-modern. The changing fortune of her students, some insisting on joining the military, poverty forcing the rest to indentured labor, become a larger allegory of the nation moving into the 30s. A nation slowly entering a period of infectious militarism and the dangers it inherits. Poverty, a thorough crackdown on freedom and speech, and the risk to life it poses. Amidst all this, Miss Oishi remains righteously indignant, finding no fault in her words and actions, even as her students brand her as a red behind her back. When the principal burns the last copy of a supposedly seditious book, Oishi silently cries, the film alternating between the close-up of her face and the burning book slowly fading to black. Figure 3.7. Miss Oishi soon quits the school, unable to bear the crackdown or protest against the militaristic mood that gradually pervaded the classroom. Even the landscape is awash with nationalist fervor. Where earlier young children were to be found singing folk songs against empty stretches of land, by 1941 the same roads are decked with patriotic banners, festoons and flags, while the Patriotic Women's Association bid their men off to war. For Miss Oeshi, the war dies, but not the suffering. She is hard-pressed as a widow with 2 children to support. However, the affectionate students find her a job at the promontory, buying her an old house overlooking the cherry blossoms in the garden. Here, in the last scene, they sing and drink sake while a lilting piano score of Should Old Acquaintances Be Forgotten hovers as the background score. Amidst all the merrymaking, the commemorative class photo of their first standard is taken out. Like the camera that lingers on the photo is touched and felt by one of her former students, gone blind in the war. Figure 3.8. The melodramatic charge of the moment lies specifically in extolling the idyllic feeling the film manages to establish right in the beginning, only to then cruelly remind us of the present. The realization that the past, now ravaged by war, can only be retained in the memories stored in time. As the blind man nostalgically describes the photo as he remembers his group along with Miss Oishi, they alternate between tears and smiles. They think of what was and what remains, and an undying bitterness even if there is hope ahead. Figure 3.9. Along with the photograph is a cycle that the students gift her. If by nothing else, then history can at least be recouped with objects left behind. The film then concludes with one of Miss Oishi's students breaking into a lilting song about seasons and love, a song she had sung as a younger girl. She sings this with equal flair now, but her voice teeters on the verge of tears, ready to fall apart even as the film fades to black. Conclusion or critical comment. Despite its melodramatic appeal, the film, made at the height of an anti-war pacifist movement, remains mired in controversy. Scholars have denounced the film as it constantly idealizes the common people of the country, effacing their own complicity in the war times. This is not to say that Miss Oishi is without conscience when she quits her job, or to imply that her 12 pupils sitting in the remote island are responsible for the war. But the film constantly idealizes the young children via Miss Oishi, who, for example, fondly remembers as one of her student-turned-soldiers as an innocent, smiling schoolboy. Sato argues that it is as if the boy had been killed in all his purity, his own culpability in the war erased, the people subjected to some unseen malignant power. Yet, 24 Eyes, symbol of post-war reformist filmmaking, evades difficult questions about how Imperial Japan decimated parts of Asia in its quest for power, for example, or the role played by newly emerging middle class, symbolized by the rest of Miss Oishi's teaching colleagues and her own husband in Japan's quest for fascism. Thank you.